People fight to be heard, to be understood. And when people are ignored, they get loud. But those are riots. People die. People get hurt. With too much volume, the message is blurred into incomprehensible noise. With too much presence, the message is forgotten. But what about those battles that never grow louder than a whisper? Now take that whisper and throw it in a locked up building with strapped down beds and say it's dangerous and unpredictable, and that it must be kept separate from our community and from our kids. Mental illness is officially out of sight and out of mind. It will stay there, essentially, until 1963, a point that will be explored shortly. A point that involves the word community, a unified body of individuals. Unified, meaning they have a responsibility to care for each other. Every person has a right to life, and their community has a responsibility to ensure that this right isn't taken away. Yet there is a war that happens all around us that goes unnoticed. My argument is that the treatment of mental illness throughout American history has led to misunderstanding, fear, misrepresentation, and ignorance to a very serious problem in the modern world that has subsequently led to brutality, incarceration, and/or suicide of thousands of people. This problem has been so muted that it still affects today's world substantially, with little improvements to the area of public knowledge. This problem dates back to the 1800s and lasted through the early 20th century. Asylums were used in many cases to fix all sorts of conditions. Lunatics were placed into asylums for undisclosed periods of time due to the danger they could be to the public, and that same general excuse was used for other conditions as well. They can't take care of themselves, or are unfit to live. But there wasn't a true reason for some of them, because they had no reason to be there. Many patients had no choice in the matter, and were involuntarily admitted for conditions they didn't have, many cases being children. A study from Cambridge University revealed that 195 children were admitted to a county lunatic asylum. Suicidal tendencies and dangerous habits were often recorded, while family history apparently wasn't important enough to put into records. Post-admission, contact with family was near impossible and death rates were substantial. The main purposes of these asylums were medical, meaning they were to help people heal and develop. Yet these children were treated no differently than adults. Their developmental years were tainted, and they suffered because of the asylum's lack of discipline in child psychology. Out of these children, 2 were identified to be 4 years old at admission, and 34 were aged 10 or younger. The rest were between the ages of 11 and 16. These were some recorded diagnoses, although the reasons for admission and where they came from were rarely taken. After, a list of conditions for these children was supplied. Treatment was not recorded or not filed, but the reasons for these conditions and admissions speak in a dark tone. One child was labeled an imbecile for being afraid after someone tried to drown them. Another was said to have epilepsy after being, quote, put inside a recently killed pig. To restate, these traumatized children were treated as adults. Quoting the article provided by Cambridge University, of the 34 children admitted who were aged between 4 and 10, 5 were discharged cured, 11 were transferred to a long-stay ward, and 4 were transferred to another hospital. There were 11 deaths and 3 outcomes were unrecorded. These institutions treated their patients maliciously. Accounts of abuse, malnutrition, assault, neglect, and many other crimes were common. But little was done. The victims didn't have much of a voice, in some cases no voice at all. This was because they were labeled as crazy or psychotic, and before the advancement of medicine, possessed. A journalist, Nellie Bly, went undercover in an asylum in 1887 and recorded what she saw and experienced. A quote from an article analyzing her experiences: "The majority of patients in mental health facilities at this time were admitted against their will. This practice continued until the 1960s. Families could commit their children or other relatives for reasons that would not be acceptable today, such as claiming they were uncontrollable or had unacceptable behaviors. Patients were treated like prisoners, locked in crowded rooms with barred windows and inhumane treatment methods. One such method was the use of malaria because they thought that the fever would kill the bacteria associated with syphilis. Keep in mind, these were mental health facilities. After this, she listed forms of abuse and mistreatment patients suffered. She served as one of the first steps towards change, causing an uproar of people who had voices to request it. Through the 1900s, this change started, though still, the most common response to a crazed man screaming would be to turn in the other direction and try not to make eye contact. Change came in the form of more strict regulations on how patients could be treated, more comfortable conditions, and better meal plans, except they were still held involuntarily. They were commonly admitted per another person's request and were not permitted to their own freedoms. Because freedom is one of our country's most shining values, this caused many problems in the political world, and a decision was made in the year of 1963 by President John F. Kennedy. The Community Mental Health Act was put into action as a step in JFK's new frontier on mental health, a foundational belief that people should not be institutionalized but instead treated and aided in their own communities while still, if able, going to work and living their lives. It promised state funding and blocks of regulations for public mental health centers and psychiatric hospitals in different towns for the use of the now free mentally.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
Mental health centers came in small commodities, with less than half of the amount promised being built as of today. The support system in communities is lackluster, and funding is not used in adequate manners. The mentally ill were set loose back to their communities, but the plan involved the other steps too, so they could come home to a healthy support system. Instead, they just went home. Some didn't even have that to go to. Homeless rates began to climb, mental illness thrived, and little help was available. Some laws were passed, and future presidents attempted to help follow through with Kennedy's plans, but unfortunately didn't have the same heart for the issue. Over time, asylums and mental health institutions were no longer the answer for mental illness. The police were. Public informing still was not released, meaning the mentally ill were still held in the regard of dangerous, simply because of a lack of understanding. Handling car accidents, animal attacks, and even bombing protocols are taught to people abroad, but few are taught how to handle a situation involving a person going through an episode relating to a mental illness. This lack of understanding and a lack of teaching leads to the death of many at the hands of police officers. These mental breaks can be dangerous and sudden, and very disorientating for the person experiencing them, though they don't occur in the same fashion for everyone, and a person doesn't have to be ailed by extreme illnesses such as schizophrenia to experience them. Most dire outcomes could be avoided with the proper approach, but that requires a skill set that isn't taught enough. 43% of people in state prisons have a mental illness. 10% of all police encounters involve a person with a mental illness, and 1 in 5 people who are shot and killed by the police struggle with a mental illness. Now take these statistics and put them beside the only 40 hours of training police officers go through in relation to situations with mental illness. These people need help, not handcuffs and not bullet holes. This problem is pressing, but there is little that normal civilians can do. However, there is still that whisper floating around, one that has gone ignored, one that has killed thousands yet still lingers in the peripheral of our vision. It is so viral that it could infect even the person right beside you. In a world full of noise and people fighting to be heard, let's be mindful not to silence those who already struggle to whisper. Tears are hard to see when they fall in the rain. Thank you.